Merging Hugen Street.
Hugen.
So yeah, just like you'd malign someone, you malign someone. I can't help you with the surnames. You're on your own.
I can't do the gutsy.
Are you recording?
Yes.
Have you only just started recording?
Yeah, we're just checking for premises.
Wait, sorry.
Hello.
I was typing
Seamless,
in
off to a good start, but
Are you ready?
I was expecting him to.
I mean, you were moderately enthusiastic at best.
I want keen influence.
Careful now, Chris.
I know, I want infomercial level enthusiasm.
Hi, Barry Scott here. Bang, and the binary's gone.
Is that the new jingle? That's
think
the
jingle.
Still new
I
one.
thought jingle was like Dutch for cheers.
jingle.
Yeah, I'll do. Jingle!
Dan's
Jingle.
guess is a Dutch pronunciation. It's jingle, binary. That's over to me.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking.
The purpose of this podcast is our attempt to be part of the changing zeitgeist, to replace the algorithm of outrage, the Twitter mobs, the YouTube comments, and the political pundits fighting for your attention with a more nuanced, intelligent, and honest dialogue.
Guys, a massive shout out to everyone that had the stomach to brave our interview with the alt-right. I hope some of you enjoyed listening to it more than we did making it. And apparently a lot of you did. We keep getting positive feedback, which for me is frankly quite bizarre, but thanks anyhow. I'd really like to thank Max, who sort of reached out with some very interesting feedback and pointed out some of our own logical fallacies. And he said that the antidote to someone who's making negative generalizations about immigrants is not just to combat it with positive generalizations. He said we were in danger of coming across a bit benevolent and patronizing. He wasn't attacking. I didn't feel need to get defensive. I took it for what it was, which was good criticism. They're indeed not a homogenous group. Immigrants are from all kinds of places, and they're all different, and they're all individuals, and I think some of the nuance gets lost in a binary argument like that. So I really appreciate that feedback.
Also, we'd like to shout to John Lopez, who had some thought-provoking input. He thought we were holding a candle to Louis Theroux, and to some extent, I think that's fair.
I love me a bit Louis.
I mean, we all probably watch and enjoy him, but in John's opinion, Louis gaslights unwitting dupes into airing their views. He will shock his liberal fan base, and he says that Louis' TV isn't far from the sneer-fest snobbery shows like My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, and he recommends we don't try and emulate it. I think it was a very interesting learning experience, and I think there's, as we discussed, there's maybe hard to find nuance in that. So, guys, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Gypsy Wedding is an interesting one. I was talking about this last night. Can you imagine a TV show that makes fun of Jewish people's wedding? My Jewy wedding, and they're like, oh my God, look at how Jewish people get married. How gaudy are they? Like, no way. And I realised that kind of gypsies are the last group it's acceptable to be racist towards.
Yeah, I find
it's
this
very
in
odd.
Spain, there's a kind
It's definitely a class thing.
social acceptability to taking the mickey out of the gypsies there.
In Spain, are gypsies the same as... Are they Romany gypsies, or are they the kind of Irish gypsy travellers?
They're Romany gypsies, yeah, and they came sort of originally from Rajasthan and emigrated across Europe, ending up in sort of Andalusia, but obviously...
Again, not a generalised homogenous group.
Distinct, ethnicity, right?
So that's Louis Theroux. I guess there's two Louis Therouxs. There's this kind of very worthy, in looking into the sort of military-industrial complex and the prison complex. That's the kind of 2000s Louis Theroux, which is very po-faced. And there's the kind of cheeky Eurotrash era.
Yeah, a bit Eurotrash, isn't it?
Louis Theroux of the 90s, where Max Clifford and Jimmy Savile. In fact, I think Max Clifford was a frustrating guest because he would not kind of engage Louis Theroux, and in the end, Max Clifford said, look, I know what you do, mate. You give people enough rope to hang themselves. Max Clifford ironically kind of had his number from the beginning.
Well, I mean, he plays journalists for a living, right? It's literally his job.
I'd actually
ended up in
so
prison.
I'm surprised that you'd be accused of ever taking Louis Theroux that seriously. I mean, I always thought he was a bit of not exactly a journalist. You never get a satisfying essay out of him meeting a neo-Nazi and stuff. You just kind of get them making waffles at home.
I don't think that's
fair point.
entirely fair, though, guys. I mean, I think I have Louis quite high respect. But I think
He's
what
a
I
nice
think
man.
Louis does really well is he has the puppy eyes and the puppy demeanor, and he knows it, and he knows that he can push things a bit further than what any other documentary maker would do. And
Well,
he just creates such interesting circumstances with that.
There's two fantastic pieces I think he's got from the old school 90s, and that's going to be the Jimmy Savile interview, and the other one was when he met the Afrikaans guy, which is a good preamble to the is it the Bloomfeld documentary on the leader of the Afrikaans sort of resistance movement.
Driver, his wife, and the dictator.
And he was really one of the most interesting people you could imagine.
Yeah.
And Louis Theroux got there first with a kind of a more frothy. Sometimes Louis Theroux puts himself too much into it, and what you get is how these people react to Louis Theroux, which is kind of good television, maybe not great investigative journalism, which he certainly thinks he is.
Yeah,
I mean, he gets interesting enough subjects that it'd be hard not to make something interesting. Which, big shout out to anyone. If you have anyone interesting we should talk to, please introduce them, because I'm just like, I'm running out of weirdos in my life to invite. Thanks for joining us today, by the way, Dan.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah, I work with Chris. I don't really think I'm all that qualified to be talking here. I think Chris just thought I'd be a nice person to talk to us about.
That's qualification enough, right? Yeah.
None of us have any qualifications, to be honest.
Totally unqualified.
My degree's in music, and I spent free time in that doing a lot of what is now called in this world would be called postmodern studies.
Oh, Jordan Peterson's
Well, we call
favourite.
it. But, when I was there, it was called contextual studies. None of us really took anything of it. It was just kind of stuff you just sort of part of what we were studying. I think I did some on queer studies and a little bit of Afrocentric studies, only because there was like one or two essays in the library about that, and that seemed a kind of a juicy one. But that'd be the same world as like feminist studies and stuff. A lot of it was in the context of music, which, I mean, that's frothy. People are writing essays on the interpretation of Can You Hear Tchaikovsky's homosexuality in his orchestration. I'm thinking, this is pathetic. And most people, even though I went to a fairly kind of liberal college, no one could bring themselves to kind of be on side with these bizarre academics.
You've just gone quite deep down the rabbit hole, Liz.
Oh, well, that's my background. That's where maybe I touch on, purely by chance, some of the things you talk about.
Thanks.
So, Chris, you promised if we got 10 reviews for the podcast, something would be happening. How far along are we?
Yeah, we got 10 reviews. I think I was trolling vegans on Christmas, and in revenge, they reviewed my podcast. Insta karma. So yeah, I'm going for the 22-day vegan challenge. I would like any suggestions for recipes. I do like to cook, and I think honestly, if I can cook myself, it'll be the only way I make this probably bearable. But thankfully, Finn's in London, so he's going to take me out to some vegan cuisine restaurants. You guys just went to Unity Diner. How was that?
Yeah, really good for the full English.
Lovely.
With no meat or animal products at all. It's tasty. Fill me up. Still going.
There you go.
Vegan powered podcast now. We're gonna go back later, and I highly recommend the Beyond Burger from. They serve it in places like Honest Burger. It's really good. Tastes just like meat. It's crazy. Really realistic. So if you miss meat, go for one of those, and you'll be feeling like at least you've had a nice burger or something.
I'll give it a go. I'll try and enjoy the 22 days. I'll try not to whinge too much. I did
Maybe you'll have
promise
formed a new habit. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, that's the intention, isn't it? They're
Yeah.
sneaky bastards. I know exactly what they're doing. 22 days is enough for a habit.
Rewire
to
your
form.
brain and then-
They're trying to hack my brain.
Well, if we get another 10 reviews, we'll do another 22 days.
Oh, no, leave it alone, no go.
We've only got to go viral and you could be a vegan for years.
No more reviews, please. Thank you.
So without further ado, let's get into episode 8. Is free speech really under attack?
From Amsterdam, I'm Marijn.
From London, I'm Chris.
From Cordoba usually, but from London today I'm Finn.
And from London, I'm Dan.
What's thought at large, but just a mirage?
So today we're talking about free speech. Dan is here to join us. Let's start by defining our terms around how we think speech should be. So what is free speech to you, Dan? What do you...
So I think freedom of speech is a branch of liberty that like freedom of movement, can only practically exist with consent from a wider society, and therefore is not a natural right like the right to oxygen. So therefore, what we consider the limits of free speech are defined by those around us. None of us live in a free speech bubble.
So it's always up for debate. It's always a shifting. Sort of, it depends on the context.
The kind of where we draw that equator is where the debate.
I'm not sure if we
lies.
should already go into it, but what is a natural right? Because is the right to air really natural right? Is that also not consent from wider society?
The right to air?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you don't have that right, it's a short-lived debate, no? You've got 8 minutes.
Well, maybe you have to pay for the air. Maybe you have to pay taxes to consume the air in a nation state that is allowing you to live there, consume the air. What are you going to do if a nation state decides to implant that tax?
I think then, in that case, what I would call a natural right versus a kind of a right by consent, they're both rights that are sort of controlled by wider society. Perhaps there's just a distinction between what we consider a natural right, which is still a construction of society, like the right to have children or something like that. I think the freedom of speech is among the contentious freedoms rather than the kind of.
Take it
So
to
I think we're always drawing lines in what is freedom and what is not, right? No, but right now maybe speech is contentious and air is not. And the right to having a baby isn't much anymore in the West, even though there used to be a bigger discussion about that in the past, right? Did women have freedom over their own body? Go back before the 60s, and this is a different discussion.
I think we should turn the switch to off on teenagers. I mean, you can drive a car, but you have to take a series of tests, right? Whereas you can just start producing people.
Forced anti-conception.
Willy-nilly.
Until
It's
16.
madness.
Starts getting into eugenics there, doesn't it? I mean,
Yes, that's why it's one of my less popular opinions. so we move on.
maybe we can do another episode on that.
I think, okay, so everything's debatable, but for me, I'm a bit of a fundamentalist. I think freedom of speech is really important. Whether it's negotiable, fine, but I would argue that freedom of speech it's very important to a functioning press, a functioning democracy, and a functioning society. You can always, as you say, be like, whoa, that's taking it too far. I'd rather someone say something that's too far and have consequences than there ever be intervention from a government or a...
And I should say, I can't think of many examples of freedom of speeches that I would actually ban. I just appreciate freedom of speech. I recognise that there's a framework within which we exist.
Okay, let's take a straw poll, right? Mein Kampf banned book in certain countries. How many here are pro banning Mein Kampf as literature?
Well, I'm pro banning it in Germany because they got a bit excited, didn't they? But clearly it didn't have the same effect in the UK, so I guess we can handle it.
You can buy it in the UK. It's actually translated into Arabic. I believe it actually is its best-selling language.
Wow. I got put on a watch list at my school because I checked it out of the library.
It was actually in the library.
Yeah, it was in a library at my school. And then but it was like a trap because once I checked it out, then I was...
Still, I'm right, watch it.
They were forever, yeah. Sometimes I'd go check out a controversial book and they're like, oh, I'm going to have a word with your teacher about that. So it all got very weird.
How fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be banned, but Marijn, we were talking about this once, and you mentioned that I think it's in Holland
It
or
is
somewhere.
banned here.
It's released with comments, with a commentary.
Ooh, I don't think I've ever mentioned that. I thought it was banned here.
No, maybe I was talking to someone else about it. The idea is that not banning the book, but having an annotated version with kind of a critique of it included in the same book. So, like, you can't just accidentally this is a great book.
It was like, whoa.
Have you read this Mein Kampf? It's great.
Do you know when you're reading those guidebooks and there's like an exclamation mark and they're like, whoa, careful, major racism leading to genocide.
I think that's
pointing out the fallacies and the kind of illogical.
well, that might be better
rhetoric,
since
or the
then you're
rhetoric.
using it as a historical text and you're
yeah,
using it in an
erase it
academic
from
sense.
history.
But here you are excusing it because it's a left-wing liberal critique of Mein Kampf. Because it's from left-wing liberal origin, it's okay. But Mein Kampf itself is from a right-wing fascist origin, and we don't want that, so that's not okay. So here we are already as a society drawing the line between which kind of ideas are we allowing and which kind of ideas are we not.
In that instance, the historical values are
astronomical,
undoubtable, right?
yeah.
But okay, so let's talk about then the musings of a
But
modern
even in its
Nazi.
original state, it should have historical value.
I don't know if this crosses over into other problems, but should be able to read something that was written by a serial killer that he wrote in prison? Is he allowed to?
So I think he should. I think the law, the line for me here in Holland is a good example. The Geert Wilders process. Geert Wilders has been on trial twice for basically the concept of freedom of free speech. First time for his film Fitna, and second time for saying that he was having a campaign rally and he was saying, "Do we want more or less Moroccans?" And he was sort of riling up people to say less, less, less. For the first one, for Fitna, the film he made as a critique against the Islam, he was not prosecuted. It was considered to count as part of freedom of speech. For the second one, the point was more, is he here inciting hate and violence in a discriminatory sense? He was not ruled to incite hate, but he was ruled to incite discrimination. And I think that should be the line. Like, I think any book by anyone written should be allowed, any opinion should be allowed. But when you're on a public stage inciting violence...
Could I clarify that point, though? Because I think the right always criticises the left and says they can't even have a reasonable conversation about immigration. What part did he say that was the thing that got him in the most trouble?
Do we want less Moroccans in the Netherlands? Less, less, less. That single sentence.
I mean, is it possible to have an immigration policy without discriminating on some level?
Why can't you discriminate in immigration? I don't understand the problem.
In Holland, you can't, apparently.
I mean, what is argued is that he's inciting people to force Moroccans out of the country.
From was that inferred, or was
it was
that
inferred,
the
but that's
case?
the whole court thing was about. Is it inferred or was it really the case? Geert Wilders argues it isn't.
So
and the opposition, the public minister, argued it was. And the whole issue is like, is he even allowed to do it? Like, where does free speech end, right?
Well, an interesting one is with kind of dog whistle politics and inferring what he means. So you're not only banning certain speech, you're actually banning sort of metaphorical meta speech. That means not only is it the job of those who define what free speech is to describe actual speech, but it's actually what speech is coded to mean. And that seems upside down Orwellian.
But that's currently how the legal system in the UK works, right? There are several laws, but the main distinction seems to be if there was an intention to alarm, harass and distress. It's the judge's job.
See, that concerns me because I know some people that are very easily distressed.
Yeah, but that's how common law is worded, right?
For anyone that played board games over the Christmas holidays, some people are very easily distressed. It should not be a legal precedent.
Yeah, but this is but then the judge would interpret that according to the severity of that particular case. I mean, like, you can say you were distressed by a board game, or you can say you were distressed because someone was trying to incite a group of people to beat you up. I mean,
sure.
I am job of the judge, right?
Picking a
come back to
ridiculous
inciting to violence or incite to cause distress. Well, you could have a very kind of staid, dull conversation, but in the kind of the power of your words and with the truths you're speaking would make people very riled up, even without saying anything. And you're not using dog whistle, you're just, I don't know, citing ugly statistics or something could do the damage, even if it's true. And it's not your fault, or I guess it is your fault if you're saying it, but a robot could be reciting ugly
statistics are never pure objective facts, though. I mean, we had a really big conversation with the right-wing guy last time. Yeah. He was citing statistics about Somalians in Finland and the intelligence of Somalians, which, first of all, you could definitely question the legitimacy of the statistics itself, and then, second of all, you can question the interpretation of the statistics.
Well, when you enter that trap, I mean, let's just say that he nods and says, okay, fair enough, and then you together, hand in hand, investigate those statistics, and they turn out to be absolutely with merit. Is he then allowed to still say them?
I think anyone should be allowed to say it anyway, but I'm a humanist. I think the equality of humans all around should be the base that we, especially as a Western liberal society, should fight for. And if you're inciting violence or hate against certain groups, then I think that should not be allowed under law. We have laws against that here in the Netherlands.
So this is why I love free speech, though, because I think if it wasn't for free speech, how would we know who the idiots were? And I really think that there's nothing better than bad ideas just being voiced and disagreed with in public. And I think the okay, sometimes it's up for debate, and sometimes there's a potential for violence. That's a grey area, but if in doubt, I'd rather err on the side of freedom. The problem is I'm hearing with some arguments at the moment is the interpretation of violence, right? And there's a group where, this minority is vulnerable, therefore to hurt their feelings is to potentially cause violence to them. Or they might kill themselves, and therefore words are violence. And I'm like, well, then, therefore, you're arguing that there's no freedom of speech whatsoever. Because if you don't have the freedom to offend anyone...
Okay, so but offending is one
at all.
thing, but offending and inciting violence can be very closely aligned. We've had a woman here in Holland who criticizes the Black Pete Sinterklaas thing for being racist, and she got so much online abuse, including death threats, and the online abuse and the death threats are often combined, right? And death threats here are not allowed under free speech. At this point, you're crossing it. You're not just expressing your opinion. You're
making an intention.
And at that point, police can arrest you. They did. And in general, even just you should be strung up, like the old black slaves used to be strung up. I don't think that at that point you're crossing the line. I think that point should not be allowed anymore.
Well, it's different because it's new tech, right? So we're all adjusting. I think the internet 10 years ago was just the equivalent of scribbling on a wall, and no one really expected to take much of what was written that seriously. Whereas now,
it is serious.
It is,
and people have died
how we
in real life.
In your country, for making documentaries about domestic violence in Islamic communities, they've been murdered. I believe, or translating books by Salman Rushdie. So, to talk about your freedom and your right, well, what happens in reality, there are certain things you do that will get you killed. It's not an academic issue then. So the right to viciously offend a kind of a cheerless, violent religion will
Let's not name it, but we all know which one it is.
We all know what we're talking about here. That's right, it's the Anglicans.
Those Buddhists.
It's those bloody Anglicans. I mean, so you will get murdered for doing that. So
you might get murdered for it. I mean, it's not certain.
Then try.
Well,
come at me, bro.
Well, okay. Sorry.
There's a distinction there.
It's very true. Yeah, but compared to sort of Anglicans, the might becomes heavier. Heavyweighted.
Yeah,
they're pretty militant. To your death.
So does the fact that there's such people exist and they're not exactly tolerated, but they certainly aren't. They're certainly accepted as a reality. Does that factor into your feelings about freedom of speech?
Well, and more so, I think I'd want to protect anyone from violence, and actually, I think as society is responsible for protecting people from some of the consequences of their action, and we do that in a legal thing. If I walk up to someone in a pub and say horrible things to them, and then they commit very, very violent acts on me, they are still culpable for the violence done.
Yeah,
right?
for the violence, right.
So it's not okay to punch a Nazi then, Chris?
I don't think...
Because this is a thing, right? The left wing is increasingly...
a Nazi. I think you should instead have a very awkward podcast with them.
But the left increasingly is concerned with not being tolerable of the intolerant, and also trying to deplatform what they call intolerant, which is also what comes down to this whole campus debate, is that left wing doesn't want to create the safe space for right wing thought. They don't want to debate it.
So I think part of my problem is that, for me, the sanctity of free speech applies particularly to three key areas, right? One is comedians, because I think comedians, sometimes when they're making fun of something, they're actually sort of helping heal. I think a good comedian is like a preacher. And if you said never make a joke about rape's never funny, that there are some very good female comics who are joking about their own experience, and that's part of society dealing with the dialogue as a conversation. So I think, and also comedians, every night they're just trying new material. I think so. Art should be free to try something.
But comedians do it in a special way, because they point out the hypocrisy and the irony.
Yeah.
the painful.
Or maybe, they tried to do that, but they just misfired and accidentally said something racist. But they should be safe to do that. That's just a gamble you take with the spoken word art form. So I'd like to see people protected, even if they said something completely fucking outrageous. I fully support them. Same with the media and like news. I don't think news should ever be scared of insulting power, offending, religious or political organisations. I think it's just completely necessary to the functioning of society. And then the third one is academia, and I think ideas should be challenged, and the point of academic debate should be to have people meeting ideas, even if they don't like them. And the best way to counter an idea is to be exposed to it and learn what the best defence is. And I'm really concerned with this deplatforming, protesting. You have a right to, but I just think it's the shittest way to respond to ideas you don't like.
Is deplatforming actually inhibiting freedom of speech, or is it just kind of compromising your?
Exactly, because I don't think a podium.
Well, like all things, there's a range, isn't there? There's some people who can't speak on campuses without police and bodyguard presence because there's such a violent riot.
Well, I mean, so is your freedom of speech your freedom to talk in any place you throw a dart?
Exactly. You do not deserve maybe the podium. Society maybe not grants you the podium.
Because I have no right to speak in the House of Lords.
Well, no, but very often these people are invited as paid speakers to these universities.
And they're sort of shooed off.
And then another group decides we don't want their views on our university. And like I say, I respect anyone's right to protest.
Often that just limits to violentless protests, right? Non-violent protests. So
and
that's not
shut it down. And I'm like, well, that's just a.
It's also it actually ends up compromising the right to property, because presumably they're invading on something that a space that someone's rented, or someone has a right to access to, and they're actually they have a right to access of way. So you can't only stop people entering the building, you can't get in the way of the access point to get to that building. They're actually not merely compromising free speech, they're compromising right to access and property rights.
Right to assemble. Do we have that? I don't even know if we have that outside of America.
Out for that.
But
it's like health and safety gone mad, isn't it? The Nazi can't get out of buildings.
Right of assembly is a nice thing that we as a democracy society have agreed upon. This is not something that's always existed.
Well, nor is freedom of speech.
True. Although the freedom of speech did survive, even during the Middle Ages.
So you couldn't, for example, discuss the virginity of Elizabeth I, or you couldn't discuss who the next heir would be under penalty of execution.
Openly, right? You're talking
about like blasphemy as well.
And I think in Elizabeth's time they also introduced the Theatre Something Act, which would not be repealed until 1968. It was the censoring of all plays in London.
Right. I mean, the Americans think they're special with their First Amendment right to freedom of speech, but presumably most countries have some law about when you're allowed the freedom to speak.
But then we're assuming there's an abstract. So right now, when we think of that's blasphemy, that's because religion is detached from society. When we go back to a time when religion was society, blasphemy was the wall around you. You didn't enter a church, and where we say the church is blasphemy, everything was the church where you could blaspheme. So I don't think the freedom of speech was ever allowed. In fact, I think when Shakespeare and Raleigh would go to those coffee places and talk about deism, they did it in hushed tones, But I think there were still people being tried for atheism well into the Georgian period.
What era is Georgian? What years?
The 18th century. It was until this century.
Blasphemy, the blasphemy of the royal house is still a thing here in the Netherlands. Very rarely enforced. Very rarely.
In Spain it is as well, and actually recently it's been enforced. I don't know if you guys have heard about Valtonic, the rapper. Have you heard of him? No. He's a rapper from Spain that was basically rapping about quite controversially, like rappers do, right? They're always criticising the status quo.
Not my kind of rap. You know. Thank you very much.
Mr. B, the gentleman rhymer.
Thank you kindly.
There is a rapper who's straight out of Surrey. Mr. B, the gentleman rhymer. But anyway, he's very critical rap. Very critical of the Spanish government, the Spanish royalty. He was tried under blasphemy, treason, and glorification of terrorism, and not denigrating but humiliating the victims of terrorism because of the whole ETA thing, the terrorist group. But he basically said we should chop the heads off the royal family, things like that. And he ran away because he didn't want to go to prison, because he was looking at 3-4 years in prison for singing these songs. He ran away to Belgium and sought asylum there, because there's also asylum seekers from the Catalan government who were kind of quashed by the Spanish government, right? Who then became exiled in Belgium. So he's then fighting his case from there, and it's very curious because
So where I stand on that, I would defend his right to say that. I think you're okay to speak aggressive truth to power.
I agree.
And I think fuck the system should be like, well, did you get consent to fuck the system? Or are you threatening to rape the system?
It sounds like
precisely.
It sounds like alongside attacking the powers that be, he also was attacking down at some victims.
Yeah,
the punch up versus the punch down.
Do you think there's what do you think about that attack? Using your free speech just to kind of malign Frankie Boyle did a number on Jordan's blind son, the glamour model Jordan's blind son Harvey. Yeah, and he got some.
That was a court case, actually.
That was actually the end of his major media career, I imagine.
It's funny actually. Frankie Boyle has been in trouble a few times, and he's also sued a few newspapers for libel a few times. So he's been on both ends of controversial court cases. That's a valid point. Probably punching up should always be allowed. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying I approve of the message, but
no. But it's a necessary part of living in a free society, right? You're allowed to criticise the powers that be, the government or the royal family.
I do understand the need to protect more vulnerable groups and avoid punching down. But at the same point, I would rather people say horrible things than we start policing speech too much.
So then, to come back to
unless it's libel. Unless you're Elon Musk and you're saying this guy is a pedo, I have no proof, but I have a huge Twitter account. I can convince millions of people that this guy is a pedo.
So he submitted his defense for that lawsuit, right? He said it was obvious to any impartial viewer that he was just trolling, infantile.
Even though he defended it a couple times, he's like, "No, I'm serious."
Multiple times retweeted.
I have the proof.
I'm joking. Look into it.
Okay.
So that comes back to, so when we talk about is free speech really under attack, to come back to is it okay to use your free speech to punch down? Well, in this kind of dissecting ideologies that protect vulnerable minorities, like sort of trans people and stuff, you might be attacking you might be holding back on what you think is a kind of an extreme left-wing ideology. What you're actually doing, or those defenders would say what you're actually doing is attacking vulnerable people.
Yeah, and that's the argument, isn't it? Are you punching down? Because anyone can claim they're down. They're representing the masses, right? Any political group can say that they represent, but you insult us and our followers and our...
You insult 1 billion Muslims.
There you go, yeah. So who gets to define what's acceptable? Who gets to define what's down and up?
Well, you can.
This is very Orwellian.
No, but you can.
When you look at people in government and the royal family, it's quite a clear-cut case.
You can judge. You can judge what is up and what is down,
sure,
actually. And judges can make distinctions between that.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And there's an intersection of taste. So so if you insult the royal family, that would be punching up. But if you said, when a comedian said on the inauguration of Trump something unkind about the young son, saying he was a rapist in the making or something hideous like that, I'm thinking, is that punching up because it's the son of the president, or is that punching down because it's an 11-year-old boy, or an 8-year-old boy?
That's definitely punching down because it's an 11-year-old boy.
Yeah, that was pretty clear, isn't it?
Quite honestly.
It's more of an attack on Trump.
The other son of Trump has done some horrible shit. Then you're punching up again. But let's not judge someone for their lineage before they've been able to do anything. No, but like an apple can fall far away from the tree. But
that comedian would say she wasn't really targeting anyone. There's no victim here. She's talking in a broader narrative.
I don't know. I like humor, and I think when we like the fact that comedians, and they did in a lot of ways, beat the Christian church. They were beating up, and when comedians make jokes about vulnerable people, it's usually self-deprecating humor.
Yes, it is. They're the monster in the story, and I think that with so Ricky Gervais gets in trouble. Ricky Gervais he's playing the clown version of himself, so you can't really hold anything he says because he's playing a character. The same I would say with Frankie Boyle. I don't think
It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Decontextualize. Well, Always Sunny in Philadelphia is drama. It's not even the voice of the comedian. They're actually characters.
Well, no, they're playing characters. They're playing unredeemable characters.
Yeah, but
and through that, you can see
characters.
sort of that mind state of those type of people.
Yeah, and often the most controversial jokes are intentionally taken out of context by the press. If you look at what it's clearly saying, it's making fun of that racist view.
Exactly.
Which brings us on to something quite topical in the news. So Sargon of Akkad, who just got...
Well, they're also getting walled out of the walled gardens of social media. And when Twitter decides that this person is not allowed on social media, it then is declaring who is and isn't allowed. And it's then... So Twitter got in trouble a lot for banning kind of noisemaker conservative sorts, while plenty of like ISIS malfeasors were just sort of there and have been there for years. So it kind of
I think it's just an interesting domain. Corporate censorship is a very interesting domain to talk about.
I imagine most kind of corporate billionaire entrepreneurs imagine themselves as kind of above the law libertarians until they get to the point where they actually have like an HR department and stuff like that, and marketing can hurt them, and then they have to start
the Me Too movement kicks in.
They have to start actually employing people to kind of monitor this stuff, which they probably never really thought they'd have to do, or maybe never wanted to do.
Someone's got to take Elon Musk's Twitter account off him. It's such a fucking liability.
Man, that's a nightmare.
So, and for some reason, I think the sort of global conversation suddenly cared a lot more about what conservative noisemakers were saying than they were ever concerned about what ISIS was saying. They were not the first to be taken off of Twitter.
Maybe they're leaving ISIS on because it's just a lot easier for the army to track them down when they're like boasting on Twitter. Like, raid tomorrow morning, boys, guns up.
Got a tweet.
So that's
Could definitely be truth to that.
Sargon.
That's the one, right?
It's named after a ancient king, Babylonian, I think.
Okay, well, he just got deplatformed from Patreon, and then the alt-light, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, people that
Patreon,
like the
right?
alt-right but they don't necessarily associate with that group, have all gone off Patreon, and it's been a big fuss. Now, if you look into what he actually said, he was using the N-word, but like the comedians we just defended, he was using it making fun of a racist perspective. So there's nuance there, but at the same point, I can't imagine Sam Harris inviting someone on their podcast and allowing them to start throwing around the N-word and accepting that and not editing out and not having a problem with it.
I'm surprised.
Just saying ninja.
Yeah, I'm talking about ninjas, by the way, just for clarification.
Neapolitans, I assume.
I'm really surprised that Jordan Peterson took his 11 people say this hill to die upon. Why Sargon
he
of
picks some odd
Akkad?
hills to die upon,
Right.
doesn't he?
Does that make you endeared to him that he kind of means it?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes he is an absolutist, and he
I think he's. I actually think he's.
hills to die upon.
I don't think he's an absolutist. I think he's a romantic.
Yes. I think he's.
Who,
Yeah, I think he doesn't
Yeah.
shy about that either.
Petey, Daddy.
I
Jay
think
Billy.
so. The point of the freedom of speech argument is that if you only defend freedom of speech when you like what people are saying, you're not a defender of speech at all. True freedom of speech is when you have to defend.
Yeah,
the
but
controversial, the
again,
unpleasant.
he has the freedom to speak, but not the freedom to have a platform. And it's weird, within the social media, the new media sphere, the online media sphere, we accepted that it was sort of a free-for-all. Everyone, it was a democratic right to participate. But old media was never a democratic right to participate. We've accepted that we have left-wing news outlets, right-wing news outlets. They assign certain columnists that they want to have their opinions shared.
The sort of person that writes to The Guardian won't get his letters published in the Daily Mail. and vice
Exactly.
versa.
So why shouldn't Twitch, YouTube, Google, everyone be allowed to do this? They can all go to
I wouldn't
Breitbart
mind that if they were-
and create their
I
own
wouldn't-
spaces.
I wouldn't mind it if those publications were compelled to say under their name their allegiance. So they had to kind of drag themselves to the dirt a little bit. I wouldn't mind
Does
that.
the Guardian have to? Everyone knows what it's about. You know what I mean? Like the Daily Mail, when it runs a story, immigrants take all jobs, doesn't have to run with it. By the way, we're a right-wing publication in the byline.
Find out, yeah.
Well, I think it would be worthy. Facebook. I mean, it would kill the Onion and kind of fund things. wouldn't it be nice if under every thing like this is a 3.6 conservative narrative.
This is news for your racist
I don't
uncle.
think it'd be good for advertisement.
It's a little bit binary though, isn't it?
Regarding deplatforming, I think it's an interesting one because although I always used to argue for freedom and freedom of speech, the right wing are arguing that the platforms have become the town hall and removing people's access to them, it is curtailing their freedom. And there's been some interesting court cases recently, like Donald Trump was ordered to unblock everyone from his Twitter account.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Because he's the president, it was deemed that he couldn't be restricting access of people to his thoughts as he was.
Right, yeah, whereas
So
Twitter
that's-
banning people is different.
It's the argument the right goes down, and honestly, I've gone quite deep down this rabbit hole because I found it quite engaging. I've always found myself left wing, but then I got sort of offended. Some of these people didn't make sense to me, and they seemed quite shrill and negative, and then so some of these quite charming right wing pundits led me down those rabbit holes, and I have watched more Milo Yiannopoulos, Ben Shapiro, Stephen Crowder videos than I care to admit, if I'm honest. And they make some good points. But the more I researched, the more I found that actually there's a reason why these guys have exploded on the scene. And it's because they're funded by the Koch brothers.
Libertarianism.
Do you think Sargon of Akkad is?
I don't know about him
I
specifically.
just can't imagine he,
But I don't know if he does that kind of like touring campuses. So what it comes from is the view from the right that there is a cultural war and that the left were winning it on universities. So they started paying all these people to go, and they would pay the Conservative or the Republican union money to hire these speakers.
See. Oh, they literally just...
So they built a cottage industry. So like it's funny that, and the way I saw it was, oh my god, these triggered snowflakes, because the right were dominating the narrative of what was happening. But actually, people were rejecting this industry of people trying to push a narrative to try and readdress what they saw as an imbalance, because not surprisingly, when you're young and idealistic, you gravitate more towards the left than the right.
Do you think there was some kind of hiccup that caused the Koch brothers to... Koch Brothers.
I think we owe it to the world to pronounce it Koch, and I'm okay with that.
So you're basically asking, was there a cock up?
What caused it? What do you think? Did the left did anything to kind of cool it up?
Well, no, as I said, for them they see it as a cultural.
Yeah, but come on, this is logical.
even-
They're libertarians, and what is the core of libertarian? It's not the freedom of thought or the freedom of to be able to take psychedelic drugs, have that freedom, the freedom of mind.
No,
it's the freedom of
the
economy.
Freedom to continue burning oil and
exactly.
not have to pay
It's the
carbon
freedom
tax
to
and-
abuse the economy and abuse people without power to gain the power and more money. It's economy without any checks and balances. And what is the left wing threatening? Well, left wing is threatening that with the checks and balances.
Fine, but I think what those kind of called the alt-lights, their stock in trade was people like Anita Sarkeesian, wasn't it? Kind of soft feminist readings of mass media and just kind of
no, but the core of that
whiny
is
stuff.
what Chris is saying is that funded by pure libertarian economical interests. Even the light, right? Alt light. Follow the money trail, right? It's
Yeah,
this,
so it's not necessarily that Jordan Peterson falls in line with the Koch brothers narrative, but there is just a lot of money in people that lean slightly towards the right getting speaking appearances around the world.
So to bring this to bring this to freedom of speech, are you saying that is it not freedom
of them to spend their money
Spend
how
their
they
money
want.
to
again,
bribe,
exactly,
to sort of
exactly.
suit
In a capitalist economy, right, where money controls power, controls the message. You know.
Well, I think if
Should
the
we
left doesn't
control
like
it?
it, they need to start paying brighter minds to start tackling the right, and they should.
Or
and I think they will.
influence
I think-
it democratically.
I envisage the pushback's already happened, right? It's in the post.
Well, I think
Because that's the best way is debate these people.
the Conservatives put a lot of money into trying to push the kind of Bush era creationist, the kind of early bubblings of gay marriage were kind of squashed in Bush's second term re-election campaign promises. They all lost. Now creationism is something they'd rather not talk about again. When Mike Huckabee said on public TV he doesn't believe in evolution, and of course he does, he's an educated man.
Yeah, it's easy for us to sneer at the culture war, but it's objectively happening, and the left are winning it on some fronts.
No, I'm saying the left. That's where the left won the one in the early 2000s around creationism. They won the sort of mom panic against Satanism in the 90s.
Yeah, that's got to be an easy battle to win.
Do you know what? Speaking of this, you know the kind of they would say like playing rock music backwards would be Satan and stuff, and computer games were causing Satan. The Christian worrywarts that made a business out of campaigning for that, they actually got like bombs in the post. And now today people cry because they get a nasty tweet. Shouldn't people who are for themselves as campaigners have at least the mettle that an evangelical Christian mum had in the 90s?
So now we're back to the
Snowflakes these days,
snowflake.
aren't they?
Yeah.
So they,
But I don't see what your criticism is.
I don't think people should have the right to be protected from rude tweets. And I don't think shouting,
when
you're a fucking idiot, you should die, should be contemplated as a death threat.
when moral conservatives want to go for it, they actually get bombed. They actually get trouble. They don't get mean tweets, and they never ever cry about mean tweets.
I don't know if conservatives never cried about a mean tweet.
I'm talking about the good old ones. I'm talking about
the Christian soldiers.
Yeah. I'm talking about the real fierce ones.
So
I just think ultimately it's up to the judge to decide whether a death threat is a genuine death threat or not.
But judges
that's
don't know
why we have this legal system.
But
right?
judges know what Twitter
thankfully.
is.
Huh?
The judges know what Twitter is.
More and more.
No, this was the problem.
Yeah.
So there was a guy northeast of England was getting on a flight, and snow delayed his flight, and he goes, if they don't sort this out within a week, then I'll call in a bomb threat to the airport.
Yeah.
Right? And then literally it's been going on for years. I think this year it finally got quashed through a series of appeals that they went, no, that wasn't a credible terrorist threat, and it shouldn't be treated under the Terrorist Act.
Well, that makes sense.
That's part of the problem, is that this is new technology. And as I say, we've gone from scrawling on a bathroom wall level hate to now it being people work full time on these platforms.
So when someone says I got 11 death threats and 19 rape threats, do they actually think they're in danger of 10 murders and 19 rapes?
No, and here's my problem.
No, they're more in danger than before. Like when Moraine was talking about these people campaigning against
they are in danger.
And the amount of violence that they get. Like one of them, I think they've been actually threatened in real life as well, right? Like it's not just a message on Twitter.
Yeah, this is serious. This is serious. But then again, Wilders,
and when it's stronger, they have
Wilders
my
on the
full
other
sympathy.
side,
But
right?
If it's just on Twitter, I always say
it's on the left
off.
and it's on the right. Wilders on the right has permanent police protection going on as well against Islam.
Guys, if I was in a pub and I got
Threats.
19 death threats, I would leave the pub. If you're on Twitter and you're having that bad a time, just log off Twitter.
Yeah, okay, but these are people saying we're fighting for a message that is censored in society, and
well, don't fight if you can't take the punches. If literally you said you're fighting, you cannot start.
well, you still want to avoid martyrship.
You
still want to avoid martyrship. So if people have legitimate death threats,
Well, yeah,
then
absolutely.
the state and the police is going to come into action, and they're going to give you police protection because the state doesn't want to have martyrs
Fair enough.
on their streets. Yeah.
Fair enough. But I hope with the judicial process we're able to filter those people who are actually genuinely threatening violence, and those people.
I think that's what we're
bad
doing,
at
and I
talking
think if you
politically.
look at it, we're in 2018 and we have global internet, and we're fairly free to say fairly many things, and even people in countries with dictatorial regimes are able to get their free thoughts out of the country through modern communicative means.
I think they're quite brave people.
and I think the world is already improving in that compared to 20 years ago, and especially 100 years ago. That's not even a comparison anymore.
Yeah, there's probably more freedom of speech 20 years ago when forums were very closed.
Well,
you had
the
to be a member and you
speech
knew what you were
is
signing up
certainly
for.
still out there.
I think the social media platform should be protected. Might not be a popular view, but if I buy a megaphone and start shouting in the high street rude things, the manufacturer of the megaphone isn't responsible for what I say. That's it's not on them at all. And it's the same way. I think the platforms, if they decide they don't want it for their terms of service, fair enough.
If you're on a forum,
they shouldn't be legally responsible.
Yeah, it's not the microphone that you're using; it's the street that you're standing on. If you're standing on the streets in town, it's the city council that is the boss of the street you're standing on, and they will determine whether you're allowed to stand there with the microphone or not. And the same thing is for these platforms; it's their street you're standing on, and so now they become the ones to decide whether they want to allow you or not. And there's no legal precedence to not allow you. This is why Twitter was never forced, or Facebook was never forced by any government, really, to change much.
Governments have tried with limited
and it's they do it eternally. You know, they do it if they have the opinion they should do it. But Google was never pushed by any government to exclude what's his name, our shouty guy from America.
There's so many shouty guys from America. You're gonna have to clarify.
Alex
Jones.
Alex Jones.
Yes.
So I watched the gay frogs.
Yes.
And I watched 10 minutes either side so I could kind of get the context. And what I find about him is he is tongue-in-cheek. He's a nutter, but he kind of knows he's being funny. Yeah. So when he's saying, this chemical is making frogs gay, what he means is these making frogs hermaphroditic, or what he's using gay in a kind of 70s way for kind of some sort of queer.
Right.
And he's being cheeky, but I think he...
I'm more concerned that President Trump listens to him than anything else.
Does he?
Yeah,
he does. Because I can't be angry at someone like Alex Jones, because it's just sort of, it's like a Louis Theroux kind of guest, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but as you say, he is kind of in on the joke sometimes. He's
Alex Jones.
Yeah,
he definitely is.
He's definitely making entertainment.
So I think I got endeared to him a little bit when he became
apocalyptic view of what the news could be like.
Have you guys ever heard of the theory that it's Bill Hicks?
Oh, I love that theory so hard. Have you heard that?
No.
So Bill Hicks and Alex Jones look quite alike, and Bill Hicks
Alex
died.
Jones is only about 38.
Right? Bill Hicks was a controversial left-wing comedian, and he died.
Allegedly.
And, the theory is that he allegedly died, but he turned into Alex Jones and just played a character for the rest of his life. Just ironic character.
I would love that to be true, but I don't think it is.
I'm always mildly these people who kind of become absolute left persona non gratas, and then when you encounter them, and they're kind of silly. I can't really ever be that angry at them.
Yeah, but it's not just silliness. I mean, for example, he's anti-vaccination.
But I don't
he
think
has a huge influence on, and I mean that tangibly affects.
But the vein of people who listen to him for his anti-vaxxing also believe in his UFO theories and stuff.
I think he's allowed to have the opinion.
It's kind of irrelevant if you.
Yeah, that's just natural selection, isn't it?
But then it affects everyone in society. So then I think there has to be
in the democratic process, you're allowed to run with ridiculous opinions. We've seen it with Trump. We've seen it with Bolsonaro in Brazil. And the shitty thing is, they're winning. But is that the problem with them having that silly opinion, or is that the problem with too many people listening to that silly opinion and getting influenced?
Banning them is not going to turn the volume down.
We were asked to present our favourite controversial example, and my one comes back to this. So my example was, some of the examples were the Horror of Christmas and the like. I remember the Jesus and Mo kind of hiccup in the sort of late new atheist era, as it was kind of started to bubble away.
What was that, sorry?
Jesus and Mo was just a kind of an online comic, and the London School of Economics banned it, and so the Channel 4, it was a series of 3-cell webcomics, and they were selling a T-shirt of Jesus and Mo kind of arm over arm like two buddies. And in the discussion about it, Channel 4 censored the doodle drawing of Muhammad. And what Channel 4 did in doing that was normalise the fact that, you shouldn't show Muhammad. And I think in the same way, when YouTube bans someone ridiculous like Jones, they're basically saying, this man is too hot for TV. This man isn't an imbecile you can laugh at because he's on YouTube and it's like alongside cartoons and other nonsense. This is a serious threat to our ideology, so we have to hide it away. And considering he's a conspiracy theorist darling,
it's
exactly what he wants.
You're right. I mean, maybe he is a threat in his anti-vax stuff, for example. But yeah, covering it up and being like, we're going to deplatform him, and he's not allowed to be on TV or in the country. It's like, and then he's going to be like, it's the lizards.
Conspiracy theorists are such that if you list like the top 40 mad conspiracies, most people might have a soft spot for one or two. Apparently, if you believe in 3 of them, you believe in all of them. There's no.
A lot of the flat earthers are QAnon members, and
nobody believes in 16 of them. They believe in all of them. So I can't worry
Except
about
the lizard people, though. Come on.
Well, that's a given.
They're
5%.
Oh, they're not real. Okay,
observable fact.
But look at the video of George Bush when he blinks in his eye, and you can see it. And then, like, even the serious 29 out of 30s.
You started fit on David Icke. This is dangerous.
I think it was crazy.
It's funny. There's
it's a fair point, though. It's a lack of critical, kind of applying critical thinking to that.
But then again, you cannot have critical thinking if you're going to say these people are banned. And sometimes comedians, when you talked about when you discussed the power of comedians, you were very, very worthy, and you said because they're unpacking something, or sometimes a comedian is just telling an offensive joke, but the context of them being a comedian makes it a joke.
Right.
And that's all you need.
Right.
That's all you need. And the same way, someone debating something ridiculous, but they've got a tinfoil hat on, that's all you need.
Yeah.
But in this kind of hard and fast rule of that should be banned speech and that should not be, you lose that nuance. And you know what? When we see someone with a tinfoil hat on, we know they're insane, and we leave them to it.
Yeah, but I think that we don't trust people's discernment
this is the problem
anymore.
with the Conservatives, that they have. So the Conservatives have Schrodinger's conspiracy theorist, right? Or Schrodinger's talking pundit, in that they're like, oh no, you can't ban them, they must have freedom. But then they're like, but if you strike them down, they will become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. And if you ban them, they'll only get bigger. And you're like, well, which is it? Are we limiting speech or are we amplifying speech? You can't have both arguments simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Is freedom of speech under attack?
Yeah,
no.
It's a fair question.
Absolutely,
that we've almost
absolutely
answered.
not. And the only few times it's ever even done is under so much nuance. Everyone is talking about it. There's a lot of discussion about it, even in the border cases. And apart from that, I think if you're living in a Western country, you're allowed to say a lot of bullshit.
I would agree. And I'd say that what's happening now is nothing compared to what happened among the Danish cartoons in the early 2000s. And similar stuff.
So is free speech under attack in Islamic societies? Well, that's a different discussion. It is.
Well, this was in the most liberal country in the world.
Well, in Denmark, did they ban I think Denmark probably supported the cartoonists, right?
That's very true.
That magazine, literally published a competition.
I mean, what did we see with France?
Cartoons.
Charlie Hebdo. Je suis Charlie,
Charlie published the next day.
Everyone supported their right to cartoonize
and some sister papers on the continent actually printed some of the offending examples from Charlie Hebdo. No one in the UK did.
Oh, here in Holland, a lot of papers did.
Maybe this is the examples of the Northern Europe. In Spain, for example, there was a comedian who got in a lot of trouble recently because he said, I'm going to read the one document that all Spanish people can agree on. And it was the recipe for Frenadol, which is like a cough medicine, because like the joke is that people are so politically divided, it's the only thing they can actually agree on. And he's reading out the list, and then he kind of, because he's got a cold, and then he kind of blows his nose on the flag, and then carries on.
Beautiful.
Which is really funny. That sketch is hilarious, right? But he got in loads of trouble, and
proving his point beautifully.
Kind of demonstrating the point that, like, well, it's not so free in Spain, right? And
you guys had
Frank trouble, and
I mean, look, there are some cases where freedom of speech are under attack. So I think particularly with regard to employment, it is far too easy to say something controversial on Twitter and then have a mob of people come after you and you lose your job. There's lots of cases where this happened. Now, some people would argue that you're not free from consequence.
Yes.
But I don't think big companies have the balls to stand up to a mob, and often these people aren't facing the consequences of their action. They're facing a just inarticulate mob that don't understand the nuance of what they said 5 years ago.
So, but
on
now
Twitter.
you have an issue with internet mobs, right? No, but this issue with internet mobs,
Yes.
because how are we going to solve the issue with internet
just as
mobs
we said
now?
that you respect the rights of these platforms to deplatform someone, I think mobs are a problem. And just in the high street, it is a problem where a bunch of people keep showing up with pitchforks and trying to burn down the town centre. We need to stop that action.
Is that happening?
No.
So there are lots of cases where people have lost their
Well,
jobs
it's happening,
for
but is
something they
anything
said
done
taken out of
against mobs?
context, like all nuance removed.
But not always. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes these people get into problems for really stupid fucking tweets. And if you're a moron to send out these tweets, they're allowed
Sure.
to judge you as too much of a moron to
And
work
why
for
would
that
you want to
company.
hire a moron?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And what's happening that's quite bitterly ironic is even like kind of people that the left might love, if they've said anything, in comedy, some bad faith or conservatives can then kind of call for their destruction as well.
Al Franken,
Thank
the Democrat senator, who took a photo of him pretending to grope a female soldier who was asleep on a flight. Probably not his finest moment, an embarrassing joke nonetheless, but unfortunately it just came out at the time of the Me Too movement, and then he had to quit his position of power.
Who's the short black actor whose homophobic tweets have come back to roost?
Kevin Hart.
Do you know, I actually, really, really early on, before Kevin Hart was in films and stuff, I kind of discovered him, and I found, and it was like Atlanta FM, it was like a sort of African-American radio station, and it was 2 hours of not just him, the host as well, of just casual homophobia, just constantly for 2 hours.
Wow.
That's all it was. And it wasn't even like comedically, it was just how they spoke. And this was in 2011 or something. Yeah. And I wonder if people still do that now?
Because people are
those days numbered?
People are watching Friends on Netflix and finding it problematic. All the jokes about Chandler's dad being gay, and it's not acceptable by comedy standards. Now, it's one thing. I'm actually okay with us being like, okay, we have more nuanced understanding now, let's not make jokes like that. We can have that conversation. Mm-hmm. But then trying to get David Schwimmer unemployable blackballed because he was once in a slightly homophobic comedy.
That was like 20 years ago, right? I mean, it wasn't like last week.
Okay, of course, that's ridiculous. Of course, you have to see that in the zeitgeist of that time and see what's happening now in the zeitgeist of our time. I do think rapey things being held accountable. And I'm not talking about rapey things as in an actor does a rapey thing, but in real life rapey thing, being held accountable by the Me Too movement, that's not a bad development.
No. But again, we just have to be careful as a society. And this isn't under attack, oh my God, Rome is burning, as the Conservatives claim. But we just need to keep the dialogue open. And there are some cases where we go too far. There's that lady who did a joke racist tweet when she was flying to Africa.
Yeah, that was one of the first victims.
Or something?
Yeah. And it was just, a poorly judged joke. That wasn't worth her losing her job over. Most recently, the CCO of Netflix was in a meeting where they were discussing which language should be allowed on the platform and which shouldn't. Now, although I have very little sympathy for Sargon of Akkad, I'm much more sympathetic to this guy who was literally in a meeting to discuss bad language and used a bad word and got fired for that. Now, for me, that's just like way too far.
Did he say we shouldn't say the word shit, fuck?
He said we shouldn't say the N-word. Let's avoid that.
And
they're like, whoa, you said the N-word. You can't say the N-word.
See, you know what I know it's impossible. I want the people who complain about that, I want them to have to explain themselves.
Yeah. Well, this is what I'm doing.
It's not fair.
No, I couldn't agree more. So the whole over Christmas, I've had my family going, you can't say Merry Christmas anymore. And I've been taking them to a task. And I'm like... Says
Why?
who told you? No. And I go, they say you can't say. And I'm like, no. Who are they? Who last stopped you from saying Merry Christmas?
It's also...
Give me the details. I'm like, you definitely can say Merry Christmas. No one is stopping you.
It's an American imported false story anyway. It's not British
faux outrage. Anyone listening, if you can tell me a story of you personally being stopped from saying Merry Christmas, I will give £10 to a charity of your choice.
You're catching your family out for sure here, Chris. No worries.
I love that.
Family of Chris. This is a false news story. Warning, I don't know where on Facebook you read this, but this is from Russian bots. Yeah. Merry Christmas is fine. Mariah Carey just made more from her royalty income on her Merry Christmas songs than she's ever done in her life before. I think she's making just more than 10 million from royalties this year.
Yeah. Wow.
Good for her. Girl
she can't even say Merry Christmas anymore. I fancy that. There's a whole generation of people confusing.
That's a window into things like Brexit, which is that. So you say that they're not that distinct because they're both kind of appealing to the nannying instinct.
Yeah.
And I think something that, off topic of Brexit, aside from immigration insecurity and things like that, what the European Union has been painted as to older people as the kind of what now? There's kind of nagging Germanic people with clipboards.
Banana obsessed.
Yeah, bloody bananas, isn't it?
But and the Australian banana is a metaphor for it, but it is that Teutonic goody two shoes ness.
So I have a theory on Brexit.
We're not doing Brexit this episode, Chris. Damn you, Dan! Damn you, Dan! What did you do?
We're saving that for a future date.
No, I don't think we'll ever do it. We'll just keep hinting at it. It'll be the elephant in the room. I get 20 seconds on Brexit. Great. So I think that the Conservatives and a lot of the right-wing people in Britain wanted a vote on immigration, but they couldn't. And instead they had a weird vote on Brexit instead, which probably shouldn't have happened. But based on what Lorraine told me earlier about Holland, I understand why they were scared to do a vote on immigration. Apparently that would have got them arrested.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
If they went we specifically want less Polish people rather than just immigration.
Polish are all right. I could afford a few more Polish in my life.
I do think that it was part of Brexit anxiety is cultural with the British kind of instinct to not like being told what to do.
You can't even say Merry Christmas Brexiteers these days. People get all upset.
I can't even call it Brexit.
Are there any logical fallacies or weird things that we've heard of bring to the table?
A logical fallacy?
Yeah, by people that argue about freedom of speech. What I find particularly funny is that both sides are trolling each other. So you do get these like the 4chan, Kekistan, Pepe meme wielding people who they sort of become a parody of themselves and a parody of how the left view them, and they get that are just so easy to upset. They're just trolling a parody of what they think the left wing is like, and the left wing play to this too. I know a bunch of left people who talk about like super Antifa soldiers on the attack and are just forever trying to whip up a frenzy in the Conservatives. And so you just end up with two people who are just having the most bizarre conversation where they're trolling parodies of each other that they've made in parody for the other group, and it's just the most bizarre conversation. There's no genuine political dialogue either. Anyway, there's a lot of people that get swept along in this and think that this is really how both sides should act. Gets very odd.
They'd all be friends. It's really sad.
Yeah, they're both trolling in a similar way, right? They're both politically trolling. They've just chosen a different colour team. It's not actually political at all.
I also don't really think they're that politically distinct in what they believe. So we were talking earlier, Phil and I actually don't think conservative people are ever as conservative as left-wing people kind of caricature them as. I do think left-wing people can be more left-wing than they say, but I think it's seldom that you meet right-wing people who are truly fantastically right-wing. I don't think they exist that easily in the modern world.
No, it's a struggle for us to find someone that considers themselves more right-wing than the right.
Gets us into those like conversations.
Whereas you can have, you go to a nice dinner party with some lefty people, and you can get them to admit that they do pine for a communist utopia.
I think the other fallacy that I think is quite funny from these groups is that they both think they're fighting fascism. So the right think that the left are trying to steal their freedom and fascism, and then the left think they're trying to stop the fascists from attacking people. And so they both think they're just these heroic anti-fascists. Yeah. But really they sort of remind me of these like kids that are playing with their friends, and the mum comes upstairs and, oh, shut up, mum, don't tell me how to talk. I want to be free, hang out with my friends.
I'm not sure about that though, because anti-fascist history comes from a very clear definition of what is fascism, and what was fascism here in Europe, and what kind of thought do we want to?
Well, yeah,
what kind
sure,
of thought
but
do we want to
the
be
modern
against?
guys on Twitter do not represent the fight against the Nazis in World War II. It's not.
And also,
comparable.
the people, Sargon of Akkad and his fans are not Nazis. They're not
No, but
fascists.
they might be fascist.
Fascists-
Fascist is not the
fascists,
same as Nazi.
Believe in like a master race, and anything that dilutes that is a problem to be eliminated. They don't believe.
I thought
that.
Sargon was one of those people, definitely.
No, Sargon's part of the alt-light.
I thought he was not just alt-right. I think
No.
I'm on a forum that has been following everything he's been saying, and there's definitely fascist, like pro-white
So again, he
race
trolls and parodies
stuff that he
left-wing
said.
press.
I'm pretty
Well,
sure.
he does. He
I
calls
put
out
my
their
leg in the
hypocrisy,
fire for
yeah.
that one.
Maybe I'm very naive, but my instinct is that true fascism is a little bit rarer than you would think by wandering around the kind of what would you call
Really?
this
Really?
sort of
In a
sphere.
time that true fascist leaders are being elected, which may be partially
Yeah.
the
Well,
stupidity
I
of
don't-
I'm
people.
not convinced
I mean,
that it's as
true-
rare as
So here's a question. Here's sort of a little thought experiment. If Sargon Akkad, who I think he's probably about 32, if he had a daughter who at 16 announced she was a lesbian, would he throw acid in her face and pay one of his cousins to murder her?
Okay, I'll counter that with this. Bolsonaro, I don't know if you've read anything about him, was just elected president of Brazil. He said, if my son would come out gay, I would shoot him.
Oh, I don't,
Before
I
he
don't,
got
I don't doubt
elected.
that for South America.
Right? And
I
yeah,
don't doubt
but
that.
you're talking about a country with 200 plus
racist.
million people that elected someone that said, I would shoot my son if he turned out to be gay. And this is after they had 20 years of left-wing governance. So the world is definitely becoming more fascist. I think you're definitely
I beg your pardon. I
still
only
danger.
really thought you meant the kind of Anglosphere.
turn to
Yeah.
fascist. And well, I still live in the European Union. You might leave the European Union. But here in the European Union, we're dealing with Poland, Hungary, Croatia. Are they turning fascist? Sure, they are turning fascist.
Italy, Greece. There's still a powerful element of it becoming a possible power.
Define turning fascist though, because in Holland, turning fascist can be like maybe we should have less immigrants from this country.
Yeah, and
That's not what. No, that's a false analogy though.
But Holland is not a good example at all.
I think it's a potential possibility, and I think we can't just go oh, okay, well, the fascism's gone, hasn't it? We don't have to worry about that. I
Well,
think we
when-
still got to be alert for it all the time.
Two World Wars and one World Cup.
when the bad news of Brexit was announced, there were people crying in the street. They thought that the Nazis were marching through Paris. Our grandparents thought they were voting for spent bananas again.
Yeah, we've overgone the Brexit 20 seconds, I'm afraid.
It's certainly a.
You're trying to impinge on his freedom of speech.
It's a cultural
Finn.
phenomenon.
This is where it starts.
It's a cultural phenomenon, I guess. Yeah.
Has anyone else got anything else?
Maybe the bandwagon fallacy.
Yeah, go for it, mate. So tell us about the bandwagon fallacy.
So the bandwagon fallacy is when you appeal to the fact that many people do something and therefore it's valid, or many people believe something, therefore it's valid. So you could apply that to multiple aspects of the discussion we've been having, right? It's like, well, lots of people were offended, so therefore they must have said something wrong. But that's not necessarily the case. It's not maybe necessarily that they broke a law or maybe impinged their freedom of speech. That's more than you know. That's from yourlogicalfallacyis.com. Great little website for
Wonderful.
learning about new fallacies. The more you know, the more you can... I mean, it doesn't mean that a fallacious argument is invalid. A fallacious argument can be invalid, but I think if you're aware of and you can spot these fallacies and get a bit better at it, it helps you to think more critically about all these topics.
Is that the Emperor's New Clothes?
Yeah, go on then.
Is that parable?
Well, kind of, but that was kind of like a mass delusion, wasn't it?
No, everyone was playing along. Like they knew they were lying, but they were kind of playing along.
But they were playing along. They didn't. Yeah, I guess so, because they would say no, he is wearing clothes, and that would be their claim.
Yeah.
That's true because everyone believed it. Yeah.
Until
They'd
they
just be that kid who says he's naked.
Yeah, you are naked. Yeah.
If I can leave you with one thing today.
Be naked more often.
Yeah. And call people out on it.
Yeah.
So they're naked.
Your enemies are naked.
I've Well, I mean, are we ready for an inspirational quote after that?
I feel ready, so ready.
Or was that inspirational enough?
I think we need something a bit more inspirational.
The Victorians had a mental health condition called monomania. They believed that some people could be entirely rational, reasonable, and function socially until their specific mania was triggered. When this happened, they became immovable and incapable of sliding out of their pre-written monologues. If this sounds familiar to modern political discussion, I implore you all, don't be a monomaniac. Don't talk about Brexit!
What? I didn't say anything.
From London, I'm Dan.
From Cordoba, but today from London, I'm Finn.
From London, I'm Chris.
From Amsterdam, I'm Marijn.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Much love. Can we make a jingle or a jingle?
Oh yeah.
Ja, we kunnen lekker jingle maken.
I'm really thinking of getting a flight to and Amsterdam just to finish off this jingle.
Okay, so what do we start with? Do we start with the beat? Do we start with the handpan, or do we start
I
with?
think you've got to lay down a beat, right? You've got to I'm getting a new handbag and a new stick.
Then we need to decide BPM.
So-
BPM.
You decide that, man. You have liberal
I think it needs to be slow.
freedom to any sort of beat.
Yeah, some of the coolest jingle sounds we've done have been really slow round.
Jingles don't have to actually be music, like full chord beat. They can just be like a it's just a stick.
Yeah, we want to do like brain-based beats.
I could do. I have like a tabla sample.
Nice.
I could do something with that.
Beamer's dad plays the tabla. Beyond the line, what have you heard?
Original ones. What we did, as my colleague, he loves reversing samples. So basically,
Oh, great, yeah.
reversed it, and then we thought, oh, if we save the ongoing backwards, then reverse it. That would be cool. So we had to figure out. Yeah, we had to figure out how to phonetically say the ongoing backwards, figure it out, and reverse it. Yeah, maybe we'll put that in the intro. But that's not obvious. Everything reversed now. That's why.
Not the stretch. The core. Reverse all instruments. It's not the core of that. Some of the best we've done it named it.
It's way better than